When I was a student back in the day, I was told that grand narratives are dead, that we're living in times which are past the idea of grand narratives. Grand narratives are all encompassing narratives, like, for example, Christianity, which don't tell you specifics about one singled out domain, but weave all domains of existence together. For example, they tell you not only how the world works, but they tell you also how to live your life. They tell you how to raise your children. They tell you how to wage war and against whom. They bind all areas of human experience together into one single narrative. And supposedly we were living in times in which those are dead, simply because the domains of specialization are so refined and so differentiated today that no matter what grand narrative you come up with, it will always be proven wrong. It will always fall apart in the details. The reality of it, however, is I think we are living in times where new prophets are booming. You see new prophets everywhere, and prophets are people who are selling grand narratives. And the prophets of today are the podcasters. You can't be a prophet as a scientist because most scientists don't have the ability to speak to people in such a large time frame so that they can get any kind of real narrative across. Think about how you engage with scientists on new media. All you hear are bits and pieces, single statements, single claims. But when you ask most people what they learned from a specific scientist or a specific specialist, they wouldn't be able to tell a narrative. They wouldn't be able to come up with a world, with an entire world that is meaningful, that has good, evil inside of it, and it is differentiated. All you would be able to repeat would be single, separated sentences and statements. That's not how you build a grand narrative. With single statements and prepositions, you can't really build a narrative. What, on the other hand, our new prophets do, what the podcasters do, is they're engaged in world building. And this is what is so engaging when you're listening to podcasts. You are actually being sucked into a specific world, a specific way of seeing things. Take Joe Rogan, for example. If you listen to Joe Rogan, whether you like it or not, you will start to understand what the term the elite means, right? Or the elite is corrupt. It works with basic frames that explain to you reality, make it interesting for you, and make you feel like you figured it all out. Even if you don't know anything about how, for example, the scientific process of manufacturing vaccine itself works in details, you will still have a sense for where to place this, whether it's a good thing, whether it's a bad thing, whether it's dangerous or it's trivial. All of that is being contextualized for you by the person who is telling the grand narrative. And people like Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson are prophets who give you a sense for everything in life, not only for specialized questions. But when you listen to Jordan Peterson, you don't only learn about psychology, but you learn about political movements as well. You learn about political polarization. He's basically trying to teach you about everything. And it's very obvious that those people are not specialists. It's very obvious that those people are not in touch with the current trends in many, many different domains. And that the big pictures and grand narratives that they're selling are themselves meager and thin soup at best and outright dangerous at worst. So we didn't end up where we expected to do. We didn't end up in a world of pluralized, if you want, small narratives dealing with small domains and always be related to facts which can then serve as a feedback mechanism to correct those narratives. But we're living in a world of grand narratives which are totalizing, generalizing, usually not really up to correction. If you listen, for example, to Jordan Peterson, he hasn't really significantly changed the grand narrative that he's selling, that he was selling half a decade ago. If anything, it's actually gotten worse. And there is no meaningful feedback mechanism to correct those grand narratives and make sure that you're not coming up with pure fictions that serve nothing else but to polarize people and give them a wrong sense of security and knowing where they're at while not being in touch with reality at all. And if you look at how our grand prophets are actually coming up with their grand narratives, it's almost like channeling. It's almost like a mystical process, because what they're doing is they are exposing themselves to images, to language, not necessarily to fact-based reality, but stuff they hear, stuff they read online, stuff someone tells them in person. And the reaction to those inputs is a very mystical process of channeling some form of deeper truth that supposedly is holding it all together. But it's always mediated through language, it's always mediated through new media, and not the result of being in touch with the actual domains that they're speaking about. Like, for example, healthcare, where you go into the actual institutions and look at the details of how those institutions are actually made up, how decisions are made, who are the people who are at the top. You never hear about that. You never hear about those specifics, but you only hear almost mystical terms about how something that is an institution supposedly is almost like a living creature, a living entity that has its own will, that has its own dynamic, and is comprehensible in terms of being its own spirit. This is the new form of spirituality. It's a form of channeling which is not in touch with reality. It's mostly just made up, and mostly sticking to the stuff that feels right and that feels exciting without really coming up to the level of complexity of reality at all. It's fiction. I think it's no better. In many cases, it's even worse than our traditional grand narratives, because our traditional grand narratives, like Christianity, for example, they all had a positive element of hope. They had all constructive elements built into them, while many of the grand narratives that are out there today are mostly centered around a sense of resentment, a sense of hopelessness, and a sense of retribution, of paying someone back, paying it back to someone. And that's not something you can build a civilization on. These kinds of grand narratives are not the kind of grand narratives which can hold people together. And it turns out, whether we like it or not, we always come up with grand narratives. And it seems that's the thing that actually holds people together. As soon as we don't share a grand narrative, we don't feel like being part of the same universe. We don't feel like being part of the same world and perceive each other as foreigners. And when that happens, you don't have respect and mutual recognition by default, but the opposite, which is dehumanization. We don't treat the other as even human, because our standard for treating others as being human is that we share the presumptions of a grand narrative. This hasn't fundamentally changed. This is the same as it was a few hundred years ago, where again, the standard simply was whether other people are Christian or not. This hasn't changed today. It has just shifted from Christianity as a grand narrative to other localized narratives from our new prophets.